Good afternoon and welcome to our continuing series, Morocco on the Move, looking at issues in the Maghreb and particularly how they affect U.S. policy. These are hosted by the Moroccan American Center for Policy, which is primarily funded by the government of Morocco. I want to thank you for joining us today. We expect a robust discussion with the emphasis on discussion. So we've gathered together some of the experts in Washington and elsewhere who we think can help talk about why it's important for the United States government to exercise its leadership at this time to resolve the Western Sahara crisis. My name is Jean-Abby Nader, and I work at the Moroccan American Center. And I can think back when I first went to Morocco in the late 80s and what American foreign policy was then toward the region, and have seen the evolution now over a 20-year period or more to where the United States' interest in the region has waxed and waned, of course, with the Cold War, with issues around energy, with issues around Iraq, and now with the Arab uprisings. America very focused on what kinds of policies it can evolve to respond to events in the region, but also in terms of serving our longer-term interests. And it's not clear from our policies what can be done. But today we want to talk about the Western Sahara because we do think things can be done, and that's the theme of our program today is why now? Why should the United States at this point in time look at the Western Sahara? And there are kind of three buckets of reasons which our speakers are going to address. One, that is consistent with U.S. policy, that no time in recent history has there been more positive atmosphere for U.S. policy actively pursuing peace in the region than right now in terms of the support internally in the country and internationally. Secondly, as we know, events every day, for example, just this morning and yesterday, events in Mali, remind us that this is an area of instability, that this is an area where there are security threats and that need to be addressed if we're going to bring stability to the region and security to our interests in there. And thirdly, of course, the forgotten part of the Western Sahara crisis are the refugees. Tens of thousands of them languishing in camps in southwest Algeria. Many, many more Sahrawis living in the Western Sahara, heartened by what the government is promising in terms of the new constitution, in terms of regionalization, which will give them more control over their futures. So there's a lot to talk about, I think, today, but we're going to limit our speakers to 5 to 7 minutes so that we can have more of a discussion. The format's very straightforward. I'll ask them a question, they'll respond, and then I may ask an additional question after that, and then we'll go from speaker to speaker. Two things I would ask you. One is please do something with your cell phones. Either put them on silent or vibrate, whichever excites you more. And then after the speakers are over and the comments within the speakers are over, we will then go to the audience and open it up for questions. Okay, everybody got that? All right. Really pleased to see that a lot of our colleagues from different agencies are here, NED, NDI, some people from the Hill, some journalists here as well, several of the foundations. And so we're pleased that at a time when America's interests are focused elsewhere, that this is a great opportunity to talk about the Western Sahara and U.S. policy. I'm very pleased to welcome as our lead-off speaker, former Ambassador Michael Ussery. Michael and I have known each other for quite a while, and I think as you can see from his biography that all of you have, he's had quite a diverse yet focused experience internationally. He served in the U.S. government from 1981 for more than 20 years. And then he went into the private sector where he has, for another 20 years or 15 years, advised a number of foreign governments. He's advised international companies and corporations and NGOs, and is currently very active in terms of helping establish American universities abroad. Mike, thanks for joining us today. Glad you could be here. As you know, our discussion today is to define how the United States interests are served by a more proactive policy than we now have in the Sahara. We have overwhelming support in Congress, bilateral support. We have the support of 3 consecutive administrations. And we have fairly widespread international consensus on the autonomy initiative as the basis for negotiations to go forward. Secretary Clinton just last month reiterated when she met with the Foreign Minister Othmani that the Moroccan proposal was realistic, credible, and serious. From your international experience, Mike, and from your time in government, how do you respond to the question, why now? Why should the United States be moving now to bring peace and resolve the conflict in Western Sahara?
Well, thanks. Thanks. It's great to be here. And in fact, I think I'm here for a little bit of a historian's viewpoint, too, because the first time I ever worked on the Western Sahara was 1985. And at that time, I was at State Department, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Near East Bureau, and I went in and we had a meeting and we said, my God, this thing's been going on for 10 years. What can we do? Can we bring it to an end? This has been way too long. And we said, why not now at that time? But and then when I went out to serve as ambassador to Morocco, I was out there when the ceasefire happened in 1991. And again, we said, all right, now we're going to see this thing come to an end. And so I wouldn't have imagined back then, 20 years later, we'd be still saying, why can't we do this now? Why is it still going on? But I think you've touched on, and there are a few things that do make now even more compelling than before. I think it's both the political support here is very clear in terms of the U.S. needs to be out there. The support we're getting from, not we, but the support for the cause is getting from Congress. I think that has been really a really nice difference over time here. But I think also the convergence of security issues, terrorism issues that you're going to be hearing about, criminality that's come out of camps over the years, but also the deterioration of the camps themselves. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, there are people who were born in the camps who I'm told now we've got people who were born in the camps who are grandparents and who haven't lived a life outside of being in the desert out there in pretty bad conditions. There are occasional reports that suggest there's issues of some malnutrition out there among children, particularly in terms of certain vitamins and things. So, while it hasn't been a static situation at all, it's not like anybody's 1985 Western Sahara issue. Things continue to get worse over time. And so I think that's compelling. I work on the refugee side and worry about the warehousing. And in the refugee world, they talk about this is either this, depending on how you look at it, the second or the third oldest refugee situation in the world. I mean, that's just unacceptable. But I do think that right now here, particularly as Americans with some guests here from embassies and others, it's in our interest. You put together the security side of the thing, you put together the humanitarian side, and you put together the fact that the Maghreb, which is now, the Maghreb Union is now 20 years old and has never really developed into it anywhere near what it could be. And I think the Western Sahara has been the stumbling issue that's kept the whole Maghreb from coming together. So, we're the country that's concerned about stability. We want to be active during the Arab Spring in constructive ways wherever we can find. I think a lot comes together for now, must be now.
Looking though, I mean, for us who sit on the outside of the policy interactions at State Department and within the administrations, where does policy come from? I mean, we know that there has been, as you said, since 1986, even before this concern with this issue. We've had 30 years of stalemate. Why is policy not moving along? Is it because, I mean, why do you think? I mean, knowing what you do about how the State Department works.
Well, just a few quick comments on that. One is I think the longevity of this just tends to reinforce inertia. I mean, I think the longer it goes, the more it's that people, policymakers say, well, why should we be the ones? What is exceptional? And, we're in the middle of trying to leave two other wars, the situation with Iran, the situation with Syria, Libya's in transition. Wow, if you really, if you look at it from a standpoint of 30-something years, unfortunately, the Western Sahara could never make the top 25 foreign policy issues in any given year. It always falls into another category. But over time, I believe there's some cumulative claim and effect. And We can't say, well, we'll deal with the Western Sahara, we'll deal with any other issue around the world when it gets to be a top 10, when it gets to be on the front pages of the newspaper, on the cable talk shows. That's just not a way to do policy. But I understand why things don't go from the bottom up on the Western Sahara issue inside state. But I look at it as a matter of leadership and an issue that needs to go from the top down. And frankly, I don't think there's a better secretary at a better time to really ignite a spark than Secretary Clinton. And I say that for those who know me, who know I come from the other side of the fence politically, but I think she's really out there. She's got a lot of respect. She's taken an interest, and if she pulls the trigger, we're going to see a dam break and a real change on the Sahara situation.
In March, one of the topics she discussed and one of the comments that the foreign minister of Morocco, when you met her both in Morocco and in the U.S., reinforced was the U.S. and Morocco have agreed to go forward with their strategic dialogue, which will cover a number of different areas. Do you see this as maybe a way to move into this? I mean, given the fact she has personally very strongly talked in support of the autonomy initiative and in support of the negotiations process. So at the top is covered. Will the strategic dialogue help motivate that impenetrable middle, which seems not to want to work, this source of inertia on policy?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that the strategic dialogue has been put into place. I think that's the type of bilateral and regional approach we should have had for a long time. I think it's a great step. I'm not sure I'm the right one to be able to tell you how it will fit within the strategic dialogue. I think it will. I think it should. What I can say is the alternative. If we miss this opportunity, if we miss this time while we have Secretary Clinton, well, if we get into a situation where we have possibly a transition in the U.S., probably not, but let's say we do, I think this thing will go on for another 3 to 5 to 7 years if we don't seize the moment right now with Secretary Clinton in place, and if the strategic dialogue is the umbrella or the catalyst or the vehicle, let's ride it out.
Seizing the moment. I mean, I love that. It's in Latin, isn't it? Seize the moment.
Yeah.
Carpe diem, yeah. One of the big issues with seizing the moment is that any kind of policy change requires either, as you said, a top-down or something incremental. If we're talking about incremental changes, which would come out of strategic dialogue or some more enhanced negotiations on the regional issues, what kinds of steps can the U.S. government take to move to support the autonomy proposal?
Oh, great. And I divide that into two parts. One is as a strategic question for foreign policy. And the U.S. has to look at it both from our duties and responsibilities in the Security Council. And maybe that's been just too much our optic for too long. I mean, certainly people would say that back in the 1990s, we stood back too much and trusted the UN to take the ball and run with it. And that gave us 10 years of arguing over a referendum and who gets the right to vote. That didn't go anywhere. As we've just been saying, I think we've got some real national interest of the U.S. unilaterally to act now, and not just to say, well, what's our multilateral UN duty require here? So I think we can, I think seizing the moment, maybe, I mean, if you look at 35 years of a stalemate, seizing the moment may actually be what some might consider to be small baby steps. But I'd like to see the U.S. Deal with what I think is just a realistic and practical proposal that's been on the table by the Moroccans for great autonomy under their sovereignty. Let's even raise it, talk about it in the upcoming MNURSO renewal, which is sometime later this month, I understand. But I think as far as the U.S., and this gets into the humanitarian side too, both for the people who live in the Sahara, but also ultimately for the people who live in the camps, let's open up all U.S. programs to the region. Not only open them up, but let's start doing them. And I know Bob Holly's given this a lot of thought. He knows the needs down there, and he'll touch on what he thinks is needed. But I'd like to see us I'd like to see us even on the commercial side. I'd like to see us get OPIC and XM in there supporting U.S. companies who want to do energy projects or tourism business or anything that could come out of it. But I'd like to see USAID. I'd like to see the Millennium Challenge program clearly able to go down into the Sahara region. And so I think in doing that, you're helping people. And then the third part would be, as we bring in and we talk about Tindouf, and again, I've learned a good bit of this from Bob about roadways and reunification programs, some training and things like that that could be done and that would really make a difference to a lot of people who've just had a pitiful life as refugees.
Mike, let me walk you back to this idea of having more visible U.S. participation or presence in the South. As you know, Congress in the appropriations report passed in December language that said there was no restriction on, or U.S. foreign assistance could be spent anywhere in areas governed by Morocco, which would include the Western Sahara. So Congress has made its intentions clear. Back to the policy. How do we get the policy aligned with that congressional intent?
Well, I'm not the best to be able to say how things work in terms inside of USAID and how they rethink. I mean, you've got programs that could possibly be expanded in the region, but I also think, and again, I defer to Bob, that there may be programs that ought to be just dedicated for the region. Aid programs could be created and opportunities down there that aren't part of an existing program inside Morocco that are specialized in terms of just capacity building, but again, as reunification programs. I don't know what we can do out of the population and refugee bureaus and things, but I think there's got to be efforts that can be made. And then on the then over there in Tindouf, of course, people who've known me the last few years, they've heard me talking about, oh my God, will there ever be a real census over there? Will we really ever? It's just amazing that we've got a UN agency that has had a tremendous responsibility for decades that can tell you so little that anybody else considers to be reliable information about what goes in, what goes out, and what the conditions of things are there in the Tindouf area.
Just one last question. Back to, well, if USA wanted to do it, they could do it. We've had discussions with AID and with MCC and with others. And they say that when they call up state and say, can we go ahead and do this program in the South? The state says, no, we have a policy against it because it's an ungoverned territory. That's a policy. Yet, if someone, as we have done, does a review of all the U.S. legislation that has to do with foreign assistance, whether it's XM or any of the others, there are no restrictions in law on U.S. funding in the South. It is some bureaucratic nightmare that was made, I'm sure, with good intentions back in the 80s. But now, as you said, at least 2 generations later, we still don't have clarity on that in terms of enabling foreign assistance to actually be spent in the South.
Well, I mean, I've been part of the, off again and on again, part of that little fight for a long time ago. And I'd seen crazy when I was a U.S. ambassador, and Ed Gabriel after me. And Ed Gabriel is here today. He's one of 6 successors as ambassador to Morocco who I've called up and congratulated on their appointment and said, I think I'm going to be envious. I think you're going to be the one who gets to see the breakthrough in the Western Sahara. But all of us, up until just recently, we couldn't even send anybody. It was a big deal to send anybody down there. And while we've got global foreign policy and we've got birds flying around the globe, it was very amazing that for years we couldn't send anybody from the embassy down there. To me, this seems like just part of a very long, illogical extension of that. Why do we want to tie one hand behind our backs, either in terms of humanitarian interests, our own political interests, in terms of ultimately commercial interests, and be down there? And in fact, what I'm hoping is that it usually, in a bureaucratic sense, in a political sense, when you have a situation like this, usually then people like us are sitting around a year later and saying they decided on one token program to do for the Sahara, so they can check the box, say they did it, and get people like us off their back. No, I really, I'm very impressed with the development down there in the Sahara. I've been down there 3 times now, of course, as a private citizen, something I couldn't do in government. But I just see that there still needs down there that we'd be great at serving and we'd be proud to be doing. and even more in Tindouf. So, in Tindouf, it's a different situation, as I understand. I mean, in Morocco, we're blocking ourselves from going down to the Sahara. In Tindouf, it's a rare person who can get the Algerian permission to get into the camps.
Right. Mike, thanks so much on that, and I'm sure that Bob will include in his remarks some insights into where and how that policy might be changed. I'd like now to turn it over to Peter Pham. Peter, as you know, is one of the real experts in Washington and the world on failed and failing states, on Africa, and on issues of security. He's the author of more than 300 essays and reviews, and the author, editor, translator of more than a dozen books. You can find him on a number of online publications. A lot of them are listed on the biography we gave you. And just recently, if you've been following Peter's work, you'll know that as recently as yesterday, he did an article on what's going on in Mali, and I think there's some very scary and upsetting news coming out of Mali for those of us concerned with security in the region. And he did a brilliant, from my point of view, analysis of, for the House subcommittee on China's relationships with Africa. And also he took a look at other countries that are investing in Africa the United States needs to look at and appreciate the impact of. As usual, I have to say that after more than 30 years in this town, Peter, I still learn so much from reading your work and from our conversations. Given the fact that we do have, and I think we can say safely, growing instability in the Sahara region, and our growing concern with that, what is the vulnerability of the Western Sahara, and what are our security interests there in bringing it into the conflict that's there?
Okay. Well, Jean, thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here with the distinguished panelists you've brought here today and audience. Let me take a step back and talk about why I'm really concerned, and I have been concerned for some time about this specific part of the world. The Sahel, for those, I think everyone is here because they're interested in the region, but that critical bridge between North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, that bridge between peoples, movements, good or for ill, and resources, has been occupied by this Al-Qaeda offshoot, or at least they didn't start that way, but they affiliated with it. And what I've been seeing the last several years is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb has adopted what I've dubbed a pragmatic approach. Mm-hmm. They're no longer basing their decisions on purely ideological purity, but rather whatever is effective. And in many cases, in a way they've learned from us all too well. In the war on terrorism, the West has largely subcontracted out a lot of operations, and they've done this. It's only a matter of time before the other side picks up on that. And classic example, if I can take a step back 2.5 years in history, to November 2009, when Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb was interested in grabbing some Western hostages. They were low on cash. Best way to do it is grab hostages from countries that are willing to pay ransom. You don't grab Brits and Americans, our governments don't pay. You grab citizens of certain countries that, despite the objections of African states, will pay and pay rather handsomely. And so they had contacted an interesting character, Omar Sid Ahmed Udhama, former Sharawi, sort of a ne'er-do-well who's involved with the Polisario, retired from that, got involved in all sorts of smuggling, trafficking, put himself for hire. They hired him. He put together an A-team, if you will, of operatives, and they carried out a very professional hit, peeled a vehicle carrying 3 Spanish humanitarian workers out, very professionally, took them, handed them over to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which held them up for ransom. Depending on which Spanish newspaper you're reading, the Spanish government paid somewhere between 5 and 12 million euros to get these people back. In addition to which, during the same period, the Mauritanians, to their credit, actually did a fairly credible job. They've been part of the US-led Pan-Sahel initiative, and then subsequently the Trans-Sahara Counterterrorism Partnership, trained up. They did a fairly credible investigation, got this guy, found the evidence, followed the trail, followed the guy to Mali, got him extradited, tried him, convicted him in open court, let him appeal his conviction. He lost the conviction. We're about to toss him in jail. And then comes the screws from the European Union and the Spaniards. Well, we need to let them go because otherwise we can't get our hostages back. So what do? Makes the Mauritanians look like fools, had to release him. He's shown on Mauritanian state TV, dancing a literal jig around the 2 male prisoners as the ransom's delivered and he's free. That long story to point out that here's a guy who was not connected, didn't share their ideology, was a criminal, but they were more than happy to hire him to do the operation. And this is a trend we've seen throughout these years. Involvement with drug traffickers, with human smugglers, all sorts of contraband, including, and how does this tie into what we're saying? This ties in very specifically because this is the new modus operandi in the region. We have, for example, what the events of the last 48 hours, if you haven't been following them in Mali, where effectively the government of Mali, whatever government of Mali, has lost control of half of national territory to a Tuareg rebellion, which has aligned itself, which is predominantly generally nationalists in origin, and one can debate the viability of a Tuareg state and all that, but is more than happy to align itself with radical Islamists, both from the Ansar Adine movement, which is linked, led by a guy named Ghali, who's actually a longtime AQIM partner. He was the guy who was sent in 2004 to collect and deliver the ransom for the European hostages, so a long time. They partnered with them in the taking of the towns over the weekend. In fact, today, if you were to drop in or zoom in on Gao, the black flags of the Islamists are flying there. In fact, the Islamists occupy the military camp in the center of town, and the Tuareg nationalists are on the edge of town. If that says anything about power distribution. In Timbuktu, the black flags are flying in Timbuktu. Music has been banned. Western clothes have been banned on Islamic images, et cetera. So partnerships are very pragmatic in this area. Where does this lead me? To the question of the unresolved question of the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, which Bob is going to talk about. Here we have a group of people who have, as the ambassador said, been warehoused for, in some cases, up to 3 generations. They have no hope. They're out there in the desert, no opportunities for education, for betterment. But the one thing they do have, military training, and increasingly the flow of weapons, thanks to the emptying arsenals of the late and unlamented brotherly leader of Libya, which is flooding this region, readily available. In fact, one of the reasons Mali lost its north was not only the military being distracted by the coup, but being outgunned. And you have these people there in these camps sitting there, and they're being recruited. The governments in the region actually have broken the code of silence. The Maghreb Omerta that has been there for many years have started to name it. Mali in the fall began speaking out for the first time very openly about Polisario involvement in trafficking through its territory. We have the kidnapping in October of the Italian and 2 Spanish aid workers from Tindouf by a splinter group of Al-Qaeda. Again, you can't operate in those areas, as Bob and others know better than I, without being connected. You don't just wander in there one happy day and decide you're going to carry out an operation. So this pragmatism combined with this group of people readily available, warehoused with no other options, especially the young men, all that adds together to a potentially explosive situation, and we see the results in Mali, and we'll see the results in other places.
So why should we care? Why should the United States worry about a country like Mali that has very little economic consequences for us, which is not threatening, let's say, our oil interests on the coast? What is at the, do we have a crisis here? Is this Sudan, South Sudan? Is this, why should we start dedicating more and more of our energies and our resources to solving the Western Sahara conflict? What will that bring us in terms of more stability and security in that area?
Well, we don't, the same thing might have been said before on September 10th, 2001 about Afghanistan. What do we care about Afghanistan? What is there for us? And it's the same thing. What terrorists need, what extremists need, ultimately We can talk all we want about virtual jihadists, about radicalization through the internet and all that, all of which is true. But they ultimately need a place to operate. They need a space. They need a basic infrastructure. And what we have here, and what we are facing in Mali, what we will face in other areas if this expands, is the creation of a safe haven. We're now chasing, whatever one can say, and we can all differ on policy in Afghanistan and in Iraq and other places. But the fact is, pressure has been put. Al-Qaeda is on the run in those areas. General Carter Ham, the head of the U.S. Africa Command, has been very explicit. Where are these people running to? They're finding places in Africa, in Somalia in the east, but also in the Sahel and the Sahara, places to take refuge. And from there, they build up the infrastructure, gain resources from not only kidnapping, but contraband, trafficking, and they're built up and then threaten Europe. I just came from here from a strategy session with a French three-star who's involved in the rewriting of their defense strategy in anticipation of their election. And one of the areas they are most exercised on is actually this very area, because they know that if the extremists get a hold there, first it'll be Europe, but after that, it will be us.
Speaking of France, just one last comment. I noticed in this morning's paper they talked that the French are starting to deport people who were associated with either Islamic extremism or the person who carried out the murdering. One of the people being exiled today was an Algerian, and they said there's some others involved. So the linkage is very clear, isn't it?
It's very clear. And then the French are now having to grapple with the reality that they need to do more themselves and have their eyes a little more open as well. Here the fellow who carried out those terrible atrocities in Toulouse, French citizen, lived there all his life, but yet his identity wasn't with France. It was with something else, and it's something that I think is shocking to them. It certainly affected their body politic, but it's something, a lesson we need to learn as well.
Thank you, Peter. Bob, everyone's referred to you, so let's go to Bob Holly. I want to, many people know Bob as a security expert, but I don't think they know that when he was political counselor in in Rabat, he was actually the interlocutor for the U.S. government with the Polisario Front. So Bob visited with the Polisario leadership numerous times, and since that time, he has interviewed, I would say hundreds, Bob, is that correct? Hundreds of refugees who have escaped the camps and come to Morocco. And in addition to that, Bob acquired his brilliant French competency working with refugees and other issues in Haiti. So he's the person who understands the refugee issue worldwide. He brings a certain sensibility of U.S. policy regarding refugee rights. And so we're really pleased that Bob can join us today to talk about why it's so important from both a humanitarian and an economic development perspective that Washington think about why it's important to use U.S. resources and political capital on resolving the Western Sahara. Bob?
Thanks, Sean. I was driving around town a couple of weeks ago doing my normal weekend errands in the car, and I had turned on my favorite classic rock radio station. I just never gotten past classic rock. I'm still sort of stuck there. And since I'm from Florida, from Gainesville, one of my big classic rock heroes is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and so they were playing this Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers song in which he's singing, "You don't have to live like a refugee," and it got me thinking about the refugees in those camps in southwest Algeria. So I was singing along with Tom Petty and thinking about not having to live like a refugee, and it reminded me of one of the few other people involved in this process of trying to find solutions in Western Sahara that has actually spoken out, I thought, in a very poignant and heartfelt way about the refugee situation. And that was the last personal envoy of the Secretary General for this issue of Western Sahara, a former Dutch diplomat named Peter van Walsum. And in Mr. van Walsum's very last report that he wrote to the Secretary General about this issue, He said a number of very important things, but having to do with how best to resolve the conflict. But I'm going to skip over those and go to what his closing argument was, because I think it was the thing that he seemed to be really most concerned about. I'm happy to talk with you here today about how we're going to solve the Western Sahara problem, et cetera, but this is an issue that really needs a lot more attention from the international community. What he said was this: the main reason why I find the status quo intolerable is that it is too readily accepted, not only by uncommitted onlookers in distant lands, but also by deeply involved supporters of the Fronte Polisario, who do not live in the camps themselves, but are convinced that those who do would rather stay there indefinitely than settle for any negotiated solution that falls short of independence. Now, I think that was a very powerful statement from Mr. Van Walsum. As Jean mentioned a moment ago, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, I've had the opportunity, and sometimes with some of my friends here, with Peter and also with Mike, to do interviews, personal interviews, with probably somewhere on the order of 400 or 500 people who have left the camps in southern Algeria by one means or another, and very often at the risk of their own lives, and have come back to join their families in Morocco. I've conducted really very extensive interviews with these people, generally anywhere from an hour and a half a piece, and have given them sort of a standard set of questions. By the way, just for those of you who are interested, since about 1988, roughly 7,000 people have left those camps and come back to their families in Morocco. Each and every one of those stories that you hear from these people is worthy of its own set of lyrics from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers about how difficult it was for them, in fact, to escape those camps and to make their way back to Morocco. There are basically 2 routes that you can go. One is down toward the Mauritanian border, and then from a town called Zirouat, which is a mining town, across to the coast in Nouadhibou. That's about 1,800 kilometers worth of open desert that you're going to have to cross. Or the other way, in which you can do it about a day and a half or 2 days, if you can manage to dodge the Algerian or the Polisario patrols trying to pick you up, is to leave the camps, if you can get out of them, and head straight at the defensive berm that separates that portion of the Sahara under Moroccan control from that portion not. That's a very dangerous route. The front of that berm, of course, since it's still an area of a hostile area, the front of that berm has still got mines in front of it, so you're quite literally having to go through minefields to get out of the place that way. And most often when you leave, you're going to do it either by using the smuggling routes, the contraband routes that have been developed over the course of the last 15 to 20 years and been developed more readily since the troubles in the area began to intensify over the last couple of years. Pay a smuggler to get you and your family out of the camps and across the desert to Mauritania, and across Mauritania out to Nouadhibou on the coast, so that you can go to the Moroccan consulate, document yourself, and get back to your family. It's a very dangerous undertaking. The unfortunate thing, of course, is that most of the time you're not able to get your whole family out at once. So what you have out here is, as Peter was saying, or as Mike was saying, 3 generations of families that are separated from one another. You may have mother and 2 kids in the camps, father and 1 or 2 kids back in Morocco, or the other way around. You have brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, etc., that have not seen each other in over 35 years now. That's the way it is. The one thing, when I did the interviews with people there, the one question that I always ended with each of those interviews was to say to them, when I get back to the United States, what would you like me to say to people? What do you want me to tell people in America about this problem? What's your message? If you were in Washington yourself, or if you were in the United States yourself, what's the message you'd like to tell people? What do you want me to carry home with me? And it's invariably the same thing. It's almost always exactly the same message, and it's that you people in the United States need to do something to help us bring an end to this problem so that we can get back together with our families again. This is what's really most important to us. Okay, you have some tens of thousands of people that have been stuck in these camps since 1975. Mike says he showed up in 85. They'd been there for 10 years already by the time you got there, Mike. And they're still there. They're still there today. How many of them are still there? We really don't have a good idea of that number. The Polisario's supporters would like to claim that there are 150,000 people in those camps. The truth is, it's probably somewhere closer to between 40 and 50,000 people that are in those camps. But however many it is, they're stuck there and they can't leave. Why can't they leave? What's keeping them there? What can be done about it? The reason why they can't leave, of course, is that the Polisario doesn't want them to leave. Like Mr. Van Walsum said, you have people in distant lands that are, ready to accept, that those people would rather stay in those camps indefinitely, than to accept any solution to the problem that's less than full independence for the territory, which, by the way, Mr. Van Walsum said was wholly unrealistic. Well, if you let those people choose for themselves, maybe they'll make another choice. After having done 400 or 500 interviews with people, I came to the conclusion, and I asked them this question, all of them, do you think that if people had the choice to simply leave the camps, and come home to their families in Morocco, would they do that? Or would they stay where they are? And again, almost invariably, the answer I got back from the hundreds of them that I spoke with was, yeah, if they had the free opportunity to pack their families up and pack their belongings up and leave without any risk involved in it, yeah, most of the people whose origins were in Western Sahara would in fact go back to Western Sahara. The truth is probably anywhere 10, 15, maybe as many as 20,000 of the, quote, refugees in those camps don't have their origins in Western Sahara. Their origins are somewhere else. So what can we do? This is the only refugee situation in the world that I know of, where one of the three what are called durable solutions is, and in fact, the first and most important one is readily available to the people who are in those camps. The ideal circumstance for refugees is to allow them to go back to where they came from. That's it. When the problem is over, when there is no more shooting going on, they don't have to fear for their lives about where they came from, whether it's Rwanda or Sudan or somewhere else, Pakistan to Afghanistan. This is what normally happens. When the shooting stops and things have calmed down, the international community facilitates moving the refugees from wherever they've taken refuge at to back where it was that they came from. The unfortunate thing is that the vast majority of refugee situations in the world today, and today there are 14 million refugees in the world, that are some 70 or 80% of those have been in camps, warehoused, as somebody mentioned here, for an average of 17 years. Of course, the ones out there in the camps in Algeria have doubled that amount. But this is the only situation in the world that I'm aware of where people can, in fact, pick up, go home, and nothing bad is going to happen to you. Nothing bad at all. 7,000 people since the late 1980s have done exactly that. And there is not a single documented case of anyone leaving the camps, going back to Morocco, having suffered any kind of adverse consequence for having done that, including all those people who were, in fact, in their youth, supporters of the Polisario and who participated in the open hostilities against the government of Morocco, which went on from 1975 to 1991. No one has been tried for any of this. No one has been prosecuted for anything. No one's been harassed for anything. You go back to Morocco, the Moroccans give you a Moroccan ID card, they give you a Moroccan passport, they put you in housing, they give you a stipend, and they help you try to rebuild a life for yourself and your families. Meaning the first durable solution is available. The problem is giving the refugees the opportunity to make the choice freely to do exactly that. If they're not allowed to choose, then they're stuck where they are. So what I believe that we should be doing in these circumstances is trying to find a way to get those agencies of the international community and those agencies of governments that have an influence on the international community, like the United States, to get the Security Council or the UN High Commission for Refugees or others who are involved in this process to begin to put in place the kinds of programs that will allow the refugees in those camps to make a choice for themselves. However it is that you think the problem in Western Sahara ought to be solved politically in the long run, and the long run could indeed be another 5 to 7 years or more at the rate we're going, however you believe that the problem should be resolved in the long run, this has really nothing to do with the choices that should be offered to the refugees who are in those camps to make an opportunity for themselves and their families to have a better life than the one that they're leading now. Refugees have rights. The oldest human rights convention in the international system is the 1951 Refugee Convention. And that convention spells out a series of rights that refugees have. And among those rights is, in fact, freedom of movement and the ability to have documentation that will allow them to go where it is that they want to go. They have other kinds of rights as well. They have a right to education. They have a right to access to judicial process. They have a right to freedom of association. They have a right to send their kids to school in the local countries and where they're living. They have a right to employment. They have a right to property. They have a right to start business for themselves. None of these rights, none of them, are being granted to any of the refugees living in those camps in Algeria, not a one. And no pressure is being brought on the international system to try to enforce the human rights of the refugees living in those camps and to give those people choices about what they want to do with their futures. There are two other durable solutions for refugee rights. The second one is to allow the refugees to be settled in the country where they have taken refuge. Now, host governments never want to do that. And in a way, you can kind of understand. You have 2 million Rwandan refugees in your country, and you really don't want them to be taking over the country. There are probably 30% of the population of the Bahamas today are Haitian refugees, and they certainly don't want them to take over the Bahamas. But that is the second durable solution. Here we're only talking about several tens of thousands of people who could, in fact, be settled elsewhere in Algeria if that choice were made available to them. And the third durable solution for refugees, of course, is to allow them to be settled in third countries. The United States takes about 75,000 refugees a year and settles them here. And they come from all over the world. You've seen them, like I know you've seen them in your travels abroad. But the first and the preferable durable solution is to allow people the choice to go back to where it was they came from if the conflict is over and there's no more shooting and hostility going on, and it's safe for them to go back there. I really do not understand why it is, and like Mr. Van Walsum said, I think it's basically unconscionable and intolerable that the community has not yet insisted that the refugees in those camps be given the right to choose about what they want to do with their lives.
Thank you, Bob. I think a critical takeaway from this is that even in the absence of a political solution. The refugees have rights.
It's extremely important to separate out the political aspects of the problem in the Western Sahara and the humanitarian aspects of the problem in the Sahara. People tend to be content, or they seem to be content, to allow the political circumstances of this problem to continue to endure. I think Peter made a very compelling case, and others have been making a very compelling case for the last couple of years, that the security situation there and the dangers posed by those camps, where you have thousands of people who are basically in hopeless circumstances and are sitting there ripe for recruitment to all kinds of nefarious activities, should also give us a compelling reason to want to settle the problem on the political side. But however you think about the political solution, you need to think about the people that are involved in this situation. Not just the tens of thousands of people who are in the camps, but the tens of thousands of their family members who are living in Morocco, who are just as heartbroken by this circumstance as the ones in the camps.
Okay. We're going to open up for questions, and as the chair, I want to emphasize the questions. I know some of you will want to have some points you would like to make, but the point should end with a question, okay? Otherwise, I'll exercise the prerogative of the chair and call on someone who actually has a question. So, as I said, the theme is here. We are discussing why the U.S. should exercise its leadership to resolve the Western Sahara crisis, and what steps, what actions can the United States take to do so. So let's start with that. Can we have our first questions? Oh, come on. Yes.
Actually, my question is what is the pulse? As long as they have that captive population, their cause.
Who are you directing your question to?
Bob or the ambassador?
I think that you have a couple of reasons. As Peter was saying, you have people in the area who have learned to become practical in some ways. If you're providing assistance to 150,000 people, or if you're providing assistance to 200,000 people, which the international community did for better than 25 years, and you really only have 40 or 50,000 people there, you can imagine what is happening to that extra triple ration that's being applied. If you're not in circumstances in which you have other ways to make money, you don't really have an economy going on, except for a contraband economy, which has become really quite sophisticated in the region. This is a huge source of income for you. The sale of humanitarian assistance, whether it's food or other non-food relief items, on the black markets around the area, is extremely profitable when you think it's that much, and it's been going on for that long. So there is a practical reason, but the political reason, of course, is that is like Van Walsum has alluded to in his report. If you think that the legitimacy of your cause is somehow based on, you're making people believe that thousands of people are living in horrible conditions because they just cannot abide the idea of ever leaving these horrible camps until they get their independence, well, there's the point that's attempting to be made. If you have to lock people down in a camp and not let them flee and make certain that they don't get away if you can prevent it, it sort of detracts from that point. But when most of the world is not paying any attention to the circumstances to begin with, it makes it a little easier to make the case.
Thank you both. Yes, Mike.
I'd just add, because I think we said the same thing in a few different ways today. These people who are living in the camps, it depends on your viewpoint, they're somewhere between being pawns and being prisoners. And, it depends on your definition, but over time, it's pretty harsh. It's quite severe. And I think everybody's made the point that there are forces, there are people out there, not in the camps, they're living somewhere else, who are saying, we think it's in your best interest to sit here and roast and, famish and live restricted. It's a prison without walls, as far as I'm concerned, without bars, but it's a prison. And after the failed attempts to organize a referendum, I I'm with Bob. I think if you let people try to vote this time, let them vote with their feet.
Yeah.
The election would be over. It'd be a landslide real quick.
Okay, Peter, do you want to add something?
Just add just 2 brief points. When you ask what the leadership has, what's in it for them, one is it's a wonderful life if you don't have to live in the conditions of the rest of the people in the camp. You have the African Union, which engages in this charade that you are a country. So you get a flag, you get a seat, you have a diplomatic passport, you get to go big summit meetings and collect all the goodie bags that they provide. And especially when summit meetings like this last year are hosted by Equatorial Guinea, some real nice goodie bags. You have all those things, and you get the resources coming into that, and you don't have to deliver any goods or services to anyone because the international community and the U.S. taxpayer, which has paid about a third of the cost for this whole thing over the last 20 years, takes care of that for you. So it's a great life if you can get it. And then I'm going to raise up the thing that's kind of standing out there that maybe we're maybe hesitant to touch. Your hosts, what do they have in it? If you think about the Arab Spring and the North African revolutions, Ben Ali of Tunisia is gone. Brotherly Guide is gone. Mubarak is on trial, if he lives that long, from his bed. Morocco has had a reform that was ongoing. The one place that has not had a reform or a revolution has been Algeria. And if this goes away, how do you explain to your populace that over the years you have spent countless lives, countless millions and millions on a crisis that disappeared like a mirage in the desert? That will be a major blow to you, the raison d'etre of your regime and its legitimacy. And that, that is powerful enough incentive, especially if you look look east and see what happened to everyone else. That would be a powerful incentive for me to kind of keep the status quo.
Well, I think you got a pretty robust series of answers there. Next question.
Somebody back there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the young man with the wedding ring.
It's for Dr. Pham. You mentioned that the epicenter or the location of the war on terror is changing and moving. You have Shabab in Somalia, AQAP, obviously AQIM. What is it going to take to get the U.S. to focus on that? Is it more episodes like Mali? What is it?
Well, I think to be fair, thank you for the question. To be fair, I think certainly those who are focused on it have paid attention. General Ham, to his credit, has been beating this drum since last fall. I think I have not spoken to him in the last couple of days, but I suspect there's a Cheshire grin of sorts on his face saying, been telling you so. So there have been people focused. I think now it's a shock. We've had this cliche, Mali, the wonderful democracy, oasis of stability, and now they've just lost half a national territory. That's a wake-up call. And it should be one when we look at the Mauritania. They were here. To be fair, we were served warning. Last fall, I hosted the Nigerians, the Malians, and the Mauritanians when they came to town, ministerial delegations, to ask the U.S. government, we need to pivot. We've got these arms and fighters coming across the borders. We need help. We were a little slow in the uptake, and we see what we have today. So hopefully this is a wake-up call. Remains to be seen if it is.
Yes, please, back there.
If I'm the Assistant Secretary of State and I want to use what few tools I have to bring some leverage to bring closure on this situation, what do I have to offer to Algeria? I'd be interested to know what are our sort of common interests that we might be able to affect some sort of compromise. And then, just as a sort of observation, over the years is, you touched upon it, Peter, the dysfunctionality in the relationship with Morocco and the African Union. I mean, I think it's not just because of what you said about getting goodie bags to a government in waiting, as it were, but it's more than that. The relationship between Morocco and South Africa is very dysfunctional. And I think that if they're both trying to be leading economies and political influences on the continent, that's not a very healthy way to govern. or to interact. And so the South African-Moroccan thing really sends me off kilter, and I can't ever really figure that out, and I think the Moroccans are frankly wrong in that. But I would like to know what leverage do you think we could bring to the Algerians to try to make them bargain in good faith?
Please.
Okay. Thanks for the question. I would say that hopefully the alarm that I was hoping would be sounded here wakes them up as well, because it certainly, if the Malians have crumbled, they're next. One only has to look at a map. And what we've done over the years, I think we made several mistakes. One of them has been we've accepted what they served up as and kind of swept under the rug a lot of things that they've done. I think it's time to be frank with them. If we're really friends, friends are frank with one another. And we certainly covered up for them in the Libya a year ago. We kind of whitewashed and swept under the rug their involvement with helping Gaddafi. I think it's time gloves are off. Guys, we're not going to accept at face value. If you try to engage in these maneuverings to isolate Morocco or vice versa, we're not going to accept that. It's in our interest because it's now in our interest. Everyone needs to be at the table, and we're not going to accept these exclusions that you draw up. We're inviting everyone. If you don't like it, you don't have to come to the party. I think, and lay it on them. And I think that will help push it. The other one is this money. I mean, the American taxpayer, I think, would be, quite frankly, appalled that we're contributing a third of the cost for maintaining these people, much without even asking if they want to be warehoused. The fact that a third of the cost has been borne by the American taxpayer and continues to be borne by the American taxpayer, I think I'd love to see anyone try to run for re-election with that as a plank in this year. I think that, to be quite honest, I think it's something out there. People knew that Congressman X is voting for, and I think, to be quite honest, zeroing out or at least attacking that will disincentivize. There are commercial interests involved in the area in Algeria with providing all these goods and services to these camps, and I think cutting that. Now, the dysfunctionality of the African Union, I think part of the problem is, broadly speaking, the African Union itself. It's come a far way, to be fair to it, from the old Organization of African States. And to be fair, I try to look at it as the glass is half full. They've really come far away, and even how they've reacted to the Mali coup, it's 100% improvement over how they reacted to the Cote d'Ivoire situation a year ago. So credit them for that. On the other hand, they're still caught up in, if you're going to be an effective organization, you can't go around pretending things, because people pretend that emperors who have no clothes are truly naked. And when you go around saying this is a country, although it's a virtual country, while you're at it, your credibility suffers. And when you exclude a major economy, whether rightfully or wrong, and I think the Moroccans, my personal views, ought to be proactive and put it more face rather than saying, wait till you invite us back, push it. And I think that's my personal view on it. But the African Union is less without Morocco. And it probably, I would argue, it needs Morocco more than possibly Morocco needs it. And that's Africa's loss. And I think the African Union has a lot of reason this year to be re-examining itself, both because of its failures last year with the Libyan crisis, the embarrassing fact that they couldn't elect a chairperson in January, and I think the frankly quite embarrassing fact that they would even consider the runner-up as a chairperson for the African Union. So I think maybe it's time it re-examines itself. And again, I think that's things that friends should be able to tell friends.
Mike, looking at it historically, this Algeria, incentivizing Algeria, what do we have? What in the 50 years of our relationship with Algeria are the carrots that we have, or the buttons we can press to bring Algeria more in line with what we think the regional interest should be, regional relationship should be?
Well, I mean, over the last decades, I think of Algeria, and we look back at Algeria as a country where the world used to turn to and say, please help us in Lebanon, please help us with other diplomatic problems. If you wanted somebody in the Arab world or in sub-Saharan Africa, if you needed a mediator, if you wanted a country that was practical and realistic and clever in their strategies about conflict resolutions. You could turn to the Algerians. The Algerians were at almost invited to be in almost every international table. So I hope that there's still some of that, and that if the U.S. actually, I don't know the answer, Jean. I don't know if we have to leverage our position with other permanent members of the UN Security Council and get it going there, or at least have good dialogue at that level, and finally get to the Algerians to see something of an inescapable reality.
Bob, I noticed that a lot of,
I'd like to.
I'll give it right back to you on this. But I've noticed that a lot of the discussion about this is, well, it's generational, and nothing's going to happen until the generation of leadership changes in Algeria. Piggybacking on what Mike said, how would you respond to that?
I think the important thing to recognize about trying to leverage the Algerians in the issue is that two things. One, things are changing in the Middle East and North Africa, and any government or set of political elites in these countries hopefully will get a wake-up call and begin to have a different vision about where they should be heading in the future. And if this isn't waking them up, then frankly, they're probably going to suffer the same fates as some of the others have suffered in the region. But I think that probably, from my view, the single most important thing that we could do to leverage Algerian policy, specifically with respect to this issue in Western Sahara, is to start to behave as a country as though we actually believe in the policy we say we have. I think it's really important that the United States actually do things that provide others the impression that we mean what we say on the issue. In this case, we have three administrations back to back who have said that they support this kind of compromise political solution that would basically leave Morocco sovereign in the region, but grant some broad autonomy for the people there to sort of govern their own affairs. That's two Democrats and one Republican, with broad bipartisan support for the same kind of solution, in both houses of the U.S. Congress, under both a Democrat and a Republican setting. But what have we actually done other than to simply say that this is our policy? You put your money where your mouth is, okay? And in this case, I think that when the United States government starts to actually do things like development assistance in the territory, or conditioning its aid to the refugee camps in a way that promotes durable solutions in refugee rights, then the Algerians, as well as others, will begin to believe that the U.S. actually means that it does have this policy, and it does, in fact, plan to pursue that policy. And I think that's probably the best thing that we can do in terms of gaining leverage on Algeria. It's making them believe that we mean what we say on the issue.
I'd just add, John, that the question, which I don't think any of us here would disagree with, is, okay, what about Algeria? But in reality, this is supposed to be a dispute between Morocco and the Polisario. But I think we all agree and accept the question. This is about Algeria. And but it's certainly not something where anybody should be giving a concession to Algeria or do something for Algeria because they do the right thing in reaction to a compromise proposal from the Moroccan side.
Ambassador Gabriel, you were in Morocco when the first big shift in U.S. policy happened, when we moved away from the unworkable referendum solution to a negotiated political solution. Given what's been said today, do you have anything that you'd like to add or clarify or give us some more thought about U.S. policy now, where it should be going?
Yes, I have many opinions, but I'd rather just...
We have a microphone for you, Ed.
I'd rather just ask a question and actually just follow up on what Bob said. And the question I have is how? And I'd like to ask Mike and the whole panel, how do we take America's stated policy and turn it into implementation? Mike said if it's not in the top 10 issues, and it's never going to be, it's not going to get there. You also said Hillary Clinton is the best thing we've got right now to focus on this issue. One of the reasons being she knows the issue inside and out, but yet she's worn out, she's tired, she's got too many issues, it doesn't make it. So the question I have is, how do you get the United States to have a sustained effort to fix this thing, to implement its policy? How? How do we do that?
Thanks, Ed.
Mike?
Well, I certainly, we've all been told hope is not a great strategy, but I have hope that our very beleaguered and very tired Secretary of State, who's earned a great rest, has still got the energy and stamina I believe she has in her to get this thing at least kicked off, and including simply getting some instructions out for some dialogue with other permanent Security Council members and say, hey, let's do something. Now's the time. Making sure, following up on Bob's conversation, that we do what we say. I think that's a great point as a U.S. Get down there, get active in the, it's sort of, I was in a radio interview this morning talking about the Romney nomination and the inevitability thing. I'd like for us to bring inevitability to the Sahara question, that we tip enough on policy that the other guys realize, well, it's never going to be a different way. It's never going to be an independent, dysfunctional, void state. Let's accept that. And so I think if we do it ourselves unilaterally, what we can, we do it with the UN Permanent Security Council members, and we're out there on record as this is what we want, this is where we want to go. That doesn't help in timing. That doesn't speed things up, but I do believe it helps from it ever being able to go back. So.
I was going to say, I would just add to that, complete agreement with him. I would just add to that perhaps we are going, one way or another, we're going to be in the next 12 months sending a new ambassador out, your seventh successor out there. And I think one of the small little steps that we can is the instructions as he goes out. Maybe the message, and not just the formal instructions from the State Department, but also in the confirmation hearings. The instruction should be, are you going to go out and engage? The question should be raised. Are you going to go down there? We find, everyone is in favor of talking. We talk to everyone. We talk to people who shoot at us, but we won't go down and take a look for ourselves in an area where there isn't a security concern and where we do have vital interest. I think that's one little step. Moving on the issue, we're going to have to, again, pretty soon, begin our budget cycle yet again. The appropriations language was there. I think these are questions that need to be, we just need to keep pushing away, and all these little things I think will add up. We just need to keep pushing on rather than just, say chalking as done. We've moved, we really have moved. We've gotten markers laid down. We now have to really connect the dots there.
So Bob, this goes to your point.
I think that you have to do things that are visible. You have to do things that people can actually see, or they simply won't believe you, or they'll continue to harbor some doubts. I mean, for U.S. the reputation of American foreign policy in terms of its stick-to-itness with its commitments is what it is in the world today. We've been a lot of places where we haven't stuck to it, but when you begin to do things that people can actually see, then they're more inclined to believe that you mean what you say. And if that's going down to the Sahara and say providing technical assistance to local government officials as the government of Morocco begins to transfer authority away from the central state authorities to the local elected officials, if that means going down and helping local non-government organizations to organize themselves and work in decision-making, whether it's social policy or education policy or business policy, et cetera, in the region, whether it's doing what Mike suggested, it's saying, okay, we're going to make Exim Bank or OPEC funding available to private sector American companies that want to invest down there in energy development or the tourism industry or the fisheries industry or the environmental industry or the agricultural industry, which is down there, or the hospitality industry. Yeah, those are visible kinds of things that people can see. And when they see the United States government actually doing these things, then they're more inclined to believe that, well, they say they have that policy, it looks like they really have it, okay? And the same thing over in the camps. If we say to people, you know, we really think refugees ought to be given a choice, you know, whether they want to stay here or whether they want to go somewhere else. So if that's your policy, then what do? Well, you do things like making X amount of money available to the UN High Commission for Refugees for resettlement grants, making X amount of money available for the UN to begin a voluntary repatriation program.
Census. You have to have a census first.
Well,
right?
it would help to have a census.
Know who's there.
The Algerians and the Polisario have been saying no to UNHCR for 30 years about having a census, but yeah, it's saying we think you ought to have a census, and by the way, here's a $3 million contribution to UNHCR in the appropriation cycles for you to conduct a census. We're not just saying it; we're putting the money up for you to go do it. And these are the kinds of things that people see. And when people see that you do have a policy, your chances of being able to persuade them to go along with that policy are very dramatically increased. But when they hear you just saying something, they don't see you acting consistently in that way, then they have every right to believe that, well, maybe he isn't really committed to that. So let's see if we can get him to do what we want it to do instead. Okay? I think that's the biggest thing we can do.
Yeah, I would think that Western Sahara thing would be a nice legacy for Secretary Clinton as she cycles out. Yes?
I've got a question that might be kind of related to what the ambassador was asking about, and that's, and it might also go back to the beginning of the conversation, but what are the wider, the wider implications of the existence of these camps? Are they, how are they destabilizing the region? What's the relationship between these camps and extremists, the movements in Mali, Nigeria, Libya? Is there any real threat to U.S. interests coming out of this situation?
Peter?
There's an emerging body of evidence that people recruited from the camps or veterans of the Polisario military have been engaged on several occasions with kidnappings for ransom by in the name of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Governments in the region have leveled accusations, and not just the Moroccans, but the Mauritanians, the Malians, and others, of people from there being recruited by, because of their unique skills or their desperation to engage in drug trafficking, other contraband. And that, of course, has its own deleterious consequences to the countries where that trafficking occurs. And so the evidence is about, you have a pool of people, and this inevitably will happen if you have a pool of people who are hopeless, who have no other options. Their only skill for some of the young men is in weapons, and they know the routes. Someone's going to come along and hire them for these skills, and so they're that ready pool. And so if you want to eliminate the pool, give them an option, a chance at something else. No one ever sets out in life, at least maybe I'm naive in this, but no one ever sets out in life and says, I really want to be a drug mule across the Sahara. I can't imagine anyone for whom that's life. But if that's the only option, it's understandable. I don't condone it, but it's understandable. But if given an option to go home, reunite to their families, or at least to learn a trade, set up a business, be resettled, I think you drain the swamp, and then you remove this pool of potential recruits.
Peter, it's ironic, isn't it, that Gaddafi in death did more for the Tuareg rebellions than he did in life? In the sense that all of the weapons from the depots that the Tuaregs who fought for him came back with are really at the core of the rebellion that's going on in Mali today.
Yes.
And Niger and Boko Haram and Nigeria.
And not just the weapons, but the trained, the military commander of the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, the Tuareg, was a colonel in the Libyan military who was involved in Gaddafi's misadventures going back to Chad in the 1980s, a veteran of all these fights. So he's contributing not just the weapons, but trained fighters who really have nothing else to lose and nowhere else to go.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes, please, over here. And this will be our last one.
Thank you to the panel for your insights. As we've heard today, there are a lot of claims about the human rights violations in the camps, and we haven't heard anything about human rights violations in Western Sahara. If claims from the Moroccan government are true that there are no human rights violations in Western Sahara, why will Morocco not support a human rights monitoring and reporting mechanism for Western Sahara and the refugee camps?
Bob?
Look, Morocco has made its territory in the Sahara completely open to every one of the special rapporteurs of the UN Human Rights Commission. And there are like 34 different special rapporteurs of the Human Rights Commission. Every single one of them have an open invitation, and the full cooperation of the government of Morocco whenever they want to go there to see whatever it is that they want to see and talk to whoever it is they want to talk to. This is not an issue. There are no international human rights organizations that are being denied entry into either Morocco or to the Moroccan Sahara. And they come and they go there frequently and talk to whoever it is they want to talk to. There are no restrictions on their movements there or their contacts. For me, it's like asking, why should there are plenty of human rights violations in the United States. Do we need a special rapporteur, from the UN Human Rights Commission for the U.S., a monitoring agency of some kind? No. If you've got an open territory, then you don't need it. If you're talking about places that are closed to the human rights community and the international system, if you're talking about North Korea, or Cuba, or the Polisario's camps, then maybe you do, need to take some special measures to be able to get in and try to take a look at what's going on with the human rights situation. But when you're talking about places where any human rights organization in the world that wants to go there is welcome to go, and where the government of Morocco has said to all the Human Rights Commission special rapporteurs, please come whenever you like, we'll facilitate your visit, then I'm sorry, this issue just is kind of a red herring for me.
Sure.
I guess just to follow up on that, I understand that in 2011 there were 4 applications from special rapporteurs to visit, and only 1 was granted. Do you have any?
I have not heard that, but if you would like to send the circumstances around that to me, I'll endeavor to get an answer for you. But I have never heard of the government of Morocco ever refusing any international body, especially one that's official like the UN, permission to go talk to whoever they want to go to.
I want to thank all of you for being here. It was another step, I hope, in both an intellectual and a policy discussion on why U.S. policy needs to move ahead with concrete steps to help resolve the Western Sahara. Please keep in touch with us via Morocco on the Move or on Twitter at Morocco on the Move. We'll be having additional programs coming up in the next several months, or other organizations on issues related to the Maghreb and U.S. interests, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thanks.